The interwar period. It's hard to imagine a more volatile time, really. A real pressure cooker, you know?
Hmm.
Societal strains, economic collapse.
And it just let these really extreme ideologies kind of bubble up and grab control.
Exactly. So today on the deep dive, we're jumping right into that chaos. You've brought together some fascinating materials for us, charts comparing regimes, lecture recordings, giving that deep historical context, and a study guide mapping out key events.
Yeah, and what really jumps out is how these national stories, Italy, Germany, they seem separate, but they're so deeply connected. It wasn't just isolated incidents.
More like dominoes falling.
Precisely. So our goal here, our mission, if you like, is to really unpack the factors that allowed these totalitarian states to rise, to thrive, and how that inevitably paved the way for World War II.
Okay, so where's the best place to start to get a handle on this?
Yeah.
Maybe Mussolini's Italy, post-World War I Italy. It was a powder keg, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Huge disillusionment. Society felt fractured, and there was this palpable fear of socialist revolution spreading.
Right. Italy felt cheated after the war, even though they were on the winning side.
They absolutely did. Didn't get what they thought they were promised. And that created this, well, fertile ground for resentment, instability. And then you get Benito Mussolini stepping in,
And he wasn't your typical politician, background-wise, teacher, journalist.
WWI veteran too, which actually gave him a kind of broader appeal, across different parts of Italian society.
And he really latched onto that national feeling when he formed the fascist party. What were the core ideas driving them?
Well, at its heart was this intense Italian nationalism, this dream of restoring Italy to the glory days of the Roman Empire, basically, a powerful militaristic state.
And violence was key, wasn't it? The sources you sent mentioned them acting as strikebreakers, suppressing opposition.
Oh, definitely. Violence wasn't just a tool for them. It was, like, central to their whole ideology. They used force very deliberately, intimidation, breaking strikes, even assassinating socialist leaders. It was about asserting dominance,
Pure terror tactic.
pretty much. But it wasn't just force. Mussolini himself, he was incredibly charismatic. He knew how to work a crowd, how to use propaganda. The lecture recordings really highlight this. He built a very strong public image.
Selling himself as the guy for law and order when everything felt like chaos, that must have struck a chord.
It really did. He played on that instability expertly. Fascism was presented as the strong hand needed to restore order, to crush that socialist threat people feared.
And then came moves like the Acerbo Law in 1923. It sounds technical, but was it more significant?
Oh, hugely significant. On paper, it was about ensuring stable government, giving a big bonus of seats to the party with the most votes. Seemed reasonable, perhaps?
But in reality,
In reality, it was a masterstroke for consolidating power. It basically guaranteed Mussolini's fascists a majority, undermining the whole democratic process, a crucial step towards a one-party state.
and by 1926, other parties were just illegal.
Gone. Outlawed. And then propaganda just took over everything. Constant messages celebrating fascism, celebrating Mussolini. Control extended beyond politics, too.
Yeah, the charts you shared make that clear. The government stepped right into the economy, setting wages, priorities. Not exactly free market.
Not at all. They heavily intervened, aiming for national self-sufficiency, directing resources. It wasn't full state socialism, but the government's hand was everywhere.
And pushing traditional gender roles, too, right? Men as workers, soldiers, women as mothers.
Very much so. As the lecturers point out, that was a core part of their social vision, reasserting traditional structures.
So Italy becomes this tightly controlled nationalistic state under Mussolini.
Okay.
Meanwhile, over in Germany, the Weimar Republic is just struggling. What were the big problems there in the 20s?
Oh, Weimar Germany was facing just a perfect storm of crises. You had the economy collapsing with hyperinflation, people's life savings just gone. Poof.
Devastating.
Absolutely. Then there was the humiliation from World War I, the burden of the Treaty of Versailles, this deep sense of national shame and resentment.
And then politically.
A total mess. The Reichstag was fragmented, loads of parties, impossible to form stable governments. The chart showing the seat distribution really paints a picture of that instability. Fragile coalitions, constant bickering.
Fertile ground again for extremist parties to emerge. Which leads us straight to Hitler and Mein Kampf. What was he actually laying out in that book, the core ideas?
Mein Kampf is, well, it's a chilling blueprint.
Yeah.
Despite the party name National Socialist German Workers' Party, it's fiercely anti-socialist. It's all about German militarism, this obsession with recreating a past German glory, a powerful Reich.
And the concept of Lebensraum is central, isn't it? What exactly did he mean by that?
Lebensraum, living space. Yeah, it was absolutely crucial. Hitler believed Germans, as a supposedly superior people, needed more territory. They were entitled to it,
Where?
primarily Eastern Europe, Poland, Ukraine, Russia,
Mm-hmm.
at the expense of the people already living there, of course.
Uh,
He saw it as essential for Germany's future survival and, well, dominance. Nazi propaganda often used maps to really drive this point home, showing the desired expansion.
and this was all tied up with his horrific anti-Semitism and racial ideology.
Completely intertwined. At the absolute core of his thinking was this obsession with racial purity, the myth of the Aryan master race.
And creating hierarchies.
Exactly. A pseudoscientific ranking of people, dehumanizing and targeting anyone deemed impure or inferior, especially Jews, but also people with disabilities, LGBTQ plus individuals, Roma people. The list goes on. And Mein Kampf is very clear about using propaganda to hammer these hateful ideas home.
Plus the whole stab in the back myth, blaming internal enemies for losing WWI.
Right, a convenient lie to deflect blame from the military and leadership failures
Okay.
and instead point the finger at scapegoats, fueling that resentment.
Okay, so you have these toxic ideas simmering. How did the economic situation then turbocharge the Nazi rise? The Great Depression hits Germany hard.
Hits it incredibly hard. Unemployment just skyrockets. You're talking, what, 40% of the workforce out of a job? The desperation was immense.
Unimaginable.
And Hitler and the Nazis, they were masters at exploiting that crisis. And the fear of communism, which was also very strong.
Who are they appealing to?
They found support across the board, but particularly with the middle classes, big business, landowners, people terrified of socialist revolution and desperate for stability for someone to blame. The Nazis offered simple answers. Jobs, national pride restored.
And they actually delivered on the jobs front to some extent through government spending.
They did. They used government control of the economy, deficit spending, what we now maybe call Keynesian economics, as the lectures explained, to fund huge public works, building the autobahns, infrastructure, and crucially, rearming the military.
Which lowered unemployment numbers.
Dramatically. And that directly fed into their popularity. People saw things getting better, seemingly.
And things like the 1936 Berlin Olympics were used to project this image of success.
Absolutely. A massive propaganda coup showing the world this dynamic, orderly, resurgent Germany while hiding the darker reality bubbling underneath.
So Hitler consolidates power. Meanwhile, the Western Allies, Britain and France, they adopt this policy of appeasement. What exactly was that, and why did they do it?
Appeasement, well, it's basically giving in to an aggressor's demands to avoid conflict, making concessions, hoping they'll be satisfied and stop. Britain and France, particularly under Chamberlain and Daladier, had several reasons for trying this with Hitler.
The main one being?
Just the overwhelming desire to avoid another war, the memory of World War I, the sheer horror and loss of life was still so raw, nobody wanted to repeat.
Understandable.
And there was also a feeling, maybe misguided among some leaders, that some of Hitler's demands weren't entirely unreasonable, addressing perceived injustices of the Versailles Treaty, bringing German-speaking peoples into Germany.
Plus, they weren't exactly ready for war themselves, were they? Economically or militarily?
Not really. Still recovering, militaries weren't built up. And, another factor was the fear of Soviet communism. Some saw Hitler, believe it or not, as a potential buffer against Stalin.
A lesser of two evils kind of thinking.
Perhaps. And Chamberlain, he genuinely seemed to believe he could negotiate with Hitler, that he'd secured peace for our time after the Munich Agreement over the Sudetenland.
But Hitler just kept pushing, didn't he? Breaking promises, testing the waters. The study guide lays out 6 key steps towards war.
Yeah, each step was a gamble, a violation showing appeasement wasn't working. It just emboldened him. Let's quickly run through them.
Okay. First, remilitarizing the Rhineland in 36.
Direct violation of Versailles, met with basically nothing but diplomatic hand-wringing.
Second, annexing Austria the Anschluss in 38.
Yep. More territory, framed as German unification, still no real pushback.
Third, taking the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia September 38, the Munich Agreement.
Where Britain and France essentially handed it over, hoping that would be it. Appeasement in action.
Fourth, then just marching in and taking the rest of Czechoslovakia in March 39.
That was the real wake-up call for many. Showed Hitler's promises were worthless. Appeasement was dead.
Fifth, the Nazi-Soviet pact in August 39. That must have been a shocker.
Huge shock. A cynical deal between two ideological enemies. Basically freeing Hitler up to attack Poland without fearing a war on 2 fronts immediately.
And finally, step 6, the invasion of Poland, September 1st, 1939.
That was the final straw. Britain and France had guaranteed Poland's independence. They finally declared war. World War II begins.
Okay, so the war starts. Let's quickly define the sides. The Axis and the Allies.
The main Axis powers, the aggressors really, were Germany, Italy, and Japan. All militaristic totalitarian regimes, often fascist, as those comparison charts show.
And the Allies.
Initially, September 39, it's Britain and France, plus China, which had actually been fighting Japan since 37.
But the alliance grew significantly later.
Right. The Soviet Union flips sides and joins the Allies in June 41, after Germany invades them. Then the U.S. comes in after Pearl Harbor in December 41.
An uneasy alliance, though, wasn't it? Driven by a common enemy.
Very uneasy. You had Western democracies allied with the Communist Soviet Union. Deep ideological divides there, held together only by the need to defeat the Axis.
Okay, let's shift focus to the civilian experience. World War II was different from World War I in how it impacted ordinary people, wasn't it?
Profoundly different. It was total war. Entire societies mobilized. The sources talk about widespread rationing, women flooding into factories, part-time jobs now open.
Yeah.
Propaganda, you mentioned war bonds. Constant propaganda everywhere.
Some of it quite clever, even humorous, like that selfish driver helping Hitler one.
Yeah, trying all angles to get people involved. But also, a much darker side was the deliberate bombing of civilian populations. That was a huge shift.
Started by the Germans with the Blitz on Britain.
And then massively escalated by the Allies against German and Japanese cities. Think Hamburg, Dresden, the firebombing of Tokyo, even before the atomic bombs. Just immense destruction aimed at breaking civilian morale.
Which raises huge moral questions even today.
Absolutely. The ethics of targeting civilians. It's still debated fiercely. And then there was the experience of occupation. Living under enemy rule.
And that varied a lot depending on who was occupying and who was being occupied, right?
Yeah. Massively.
Yeah.
Nazi occupation in, say, Norway, which they saw as racially acceptable, was very different from Poland, where it was utterly brutal repression, slave labor, extermination. Nazi racial ideology dictated everything.
And places like Vichy, France, collaborationist regimes.
Yeah, Vichy shows the complex, often morally gray reality for occupied populations. Collaboration, resistance, just trying to survive. It wasn't simple.
And we have to talk about the Holocaust, the systematic attempt to wipe out European Jews and other groups.
It's central to understanding the Nazi regime and the civilian experience, particularly in occupied Europe.
Yeah.
An unparalleled act of genocide. The sources track its horrifying evolution.
From discrimination and ghettos
To the Einsatzgruppen and mobile killing squads following the army into the Soviet Union, and then the final solution. The industrial-scale murder in death camps like Auschwitz-Birkenau, that sign Arbeit macht frei, work sets you free over the gate. Chillin'.
The Wannsee Conference in early 42 really formalized that industrialized killing.
It marked an intensification, yeah. And the truly horrifying thing is, Hitler prioritized this extermination program even when the war was clearly turning against Germany. It shows how fundamental this murderous ideology was to him and the regime.
So, wrapping this deep dive up, it's just this terrifying chain reaction, isn't it? WWI instability, extreme ideologies finding fertile ground in economic despair, nationalism twisted into hatred, and appeasement failing catastrophically.
It really highlights the dangers, doesn't it? Unchecked power, economic desperation being exploited, using fear and resentment. The consequences can be just, well, unimaginable.
And it feels like a constant reminder about how fragile democracy can be, the need to stay vigilant against these kinds of extremist ideas, whatever form they take.
Definitely. And it also makes you reflect on humanity itself, the capacity for such unbelievable cruelty, but also for incredible resilience and resistance in the face of it.
This has been a sobering look at a truly pivotal and, frankly, disturbing time.
It has. And there's so much more to explore. We really hope you, the listener, will dig deeper into the sources, keep asking questions about this era and what it means for us today.